Hi, I'm Kristi Dane. I am the director of the Cohorts program with Art Bridges, and this talk is Tackling Climate Change, a conversation on leveraging funding opportunities. It's also the last lecture before lunch, so I hope everyone got up and moved a little bit during the break. So this is a conversation that we're having with friends where we're talking about climate change, sustainability, practical things in the museum fields, and funding opportunities. We hope that you take away information, inspiration, and feel that it's feasible to apply for grants to tackle these climate projects. So I'll start with introductions. Kelsey Shell is the Environmental and Sustainable Strategist at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. In this role, she braids sustainability into the exhibitions and operations of the museum by facilitating interdepartmental dialogue and building trust. She initiated the MoCA's Green Team and acts as liaison to MoCA Environmental Council, an affinity support group that funds sustainability initiatives at the museum. In concert with the operations team, Kelsey is working to decarbonize MoCA's campus through infrastructure retrofits and revised energy use habits. And then Stephanie Shapiro, she's the co-founder and managing director at the nonprofit Environment and Culture Partners, where she's a strategic advisor and collaborator with specific expertise in the climate and cultural sectors, program and change management. Stephanie has a 13-year track record of delivering complex and high-impact projects in the federal, nonprofit, higher education, and private sectors. And then we have James Merle Thomas. And James is a scholar, curator, and executive with 2 decades of experience in cultural, academic, and creative arts sectors. He is currently the inaugural deputy director at the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation, where he shapes strategic partnerships with a wide range of universities, museums, and cultural institutions, including the foundation's Frankenthaler Climate Initiative. So we're going to kick things off with James.
Hear me? Okay. Good morning. Thanks all for coming back for day 2 of what's been a really exciting conversation. I want to begin. Is this one on? Yes. First, Kristi, thank you so much for those introductions. And I want to begin by thanking Anne and the staff of everyone in Art Bridges for convening such a wonderful conversation, and especially all of you. I want to just flag right away my subject position as someone with a foundation, in that I acknowledge that I have a very different power relationship than maybe many of you do here at the invite of Art Bridges, and I wanted to note the way that I was just struck by the way that the conversation yesterday would often begin with the conveners saying, I recognize topic X, but actually I'm really interested in topic Y, so I'm going to talk about Y. And then we may get back to X, and everyone in the room has been matching that energy, and it's been an amazing set of conversations. And I just wanted to note that it's humbling to be in a position to listen and engage with that. So with that in mind, I want to talk very briefly about what I do at the Frankenthaler Foundation. Then I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to talk a little bit about the specifics of our FCI program, as well as context in the field, in the sector, and then I'm going to turn it over to my other talented colleague, Kelsey, who is leading the charge with a great case study and one of our key partners. Just for context, if you're not familiar with the Frankenthaler Foundation and what we do, we're at one of the many artist-endowed foundations around the block right now. We've been around for 10 years, and we're pretty evenly divided right now between issues around the legacy and artwork of Frankenthaler, and then an increasingly active philanthropic division. So what that looks like in practice is, we're getting ready, for example, for a centennial-affiliated retrospective in 2028 at the National Gallery of Art. We have a major monographic show at Palazzo Strozzi later this year. Shifting away from the artist, then we do projects that kind of connect to the artist's legacy, but then move into programming and grant making. So we run something, for example, called the Frankenthaler Prints Initiative. So we have a cohort of 10 university museums We give each of those museums between 15 and 20 prints as a gift, as well as a grant that then they realize for programming. And what they do with that in terms of exhibitions and programming, we don't determine, but we're now in a position where we're turning that more into a kind of cohort model. And then more broadly, we engage with philanthropic work. Like, to give you just one example, last year we worked with the research center at SAM to endow a pre-doctoral / postdoctoral fellowship. And one of the things we're interested in doing with that is not just, you know, naming a fellowship, but going back to them and saying, well, what does the field really need right now? And Amelia Gerlitz, someone I'm sure many people in this room know, you know, they were talking about, well, there's a key part of professionalization that needs to be part of this training. So we're looking to kind of listen to our grantees and our partners to think about the ways that we're evolving our philanthropic work. So that's a kind of broad strokes of what we're doing. Climate. So in 2022, we kicked off the Frankenthaler Climate Initiative. We're now in year 4 of an initial 5-year commitment. It's $15 million over 5 years. And to date, what that has looked like is supplying, in the form of direct grants to museums and nonprofit art institutions, funds that tangibly support climate change. And one way I like to talk about this, for those of you who are kind of trafficking in the world of, you know, global contemporary art and the biennials, like, which is the waters I was swimming in for a long time, you know, there's an iconography of climate change. So we're not funding, say, the exhibition of John Akomfra's, you know, environmentally themed works. We are funding the museums that are interested in, say, going solar or reducing their carbon emission footprint, and that's an important distinction to make. We can talk about those other things, but for example, the Tiger Foundation is much more invested in that kind of curatorial track. We're very much about what I would describe, and as I think we'll talk about today, like technical plus. I wanted to note that there are many organizations out there, Gallery Climate Coalition, Art for Acres, Artists Commit, the list goes on and on. There are many orgs right now talking about packaging, reuse of materials, this kind of thing. As we'll get into today, the FCI is fundamentally engaged with energy, and for reasons that Stephanie will talk about. I also want to note, and we'll get into case studies, you know, this extends, I think, directly from some things that Whitney, our peer, was talking about. You know, there are many moments where institutions are in their journey with climate action. And some of these institutions are huge, right? Some of them are fortunate enough to have talented leaders at the top of the org chart who are working with these issues. We're happy and delighted to work with visionary people who are doing that. We're also very committed to working with orgs who have a staff of 3, who have an operating budget of less than $2 million, where the director is also the curator who's also going to Home Depot to buy the dehumidifier, you know? And so we're really committed to finding different entry points into this conversation, and I think we'll get into a bit of that today. Actually, I'll stop there because I think this is going to be much more productive when we get into, you know, a robust conversation and an exchange. So I'll turn things over to Stephanie.
Great. Can everyone hear me with us? All right, great. I'm Stephanie. Thank you again for the introduction. And I'm going to frame up a little bit about the cultural sector first and climate and ECP, and then go into Frankenthaler, some funding, kind of just responding to a lot of the conversations I had yesterday where people were like, where do I start? What does this mean? Type of thing. So Environment and Culture Partners, we're a nonprofit, and we focus on kind of 3 pillars: getting knowledge and skills to everyone in cultural organizations to be able to do this work in the climate. We work on making sure that you have a voice and that you feel like you have a voice of culture in every conversation around climate, and that we have resources and implementation support and funding for you to do this work. I'm going to talk about a few projects just as examples, which are also resources for you. The first is the Climate Resilience Resources for Cultural Heritage. This is a partnership with NEH and FAIC. These are free resources just launched in March. They will help you create your own climate resilience strategy. There's an interactive map, there's modules, et cetera. This is a great place to start. The second is, this is related to FCI, but really focusing on energy. Energy is usually your largest budget item after staff. So if you're looking for a big bang for your buck, frankly, if you're looking for good PR, want to save some money, look at your energy bills. Figure out where your energy bills are coming from. Use Energy Star Portfolio Manager, benchmark your energy, collect your data, be able to then think about reducing, whether that's installing LEDs, making sure that you can measure that progress is really important. I also just want to say that in the field, what we're really seeing is different motivations for doing this work, and I kind of touched on it, but PR is a big one, and we can't really shy away from that, but also that money savings piece. If you don't think energy is your biggest bill, what is your biggest bill? Look at your financial ledger, see what you're spending money on, see where you could cut. It's really about making different decisions. So there's a systems change and a behavior change, which I think we've all been talking about, that agency of your individual agency and collective agency. And it isn't just one person, right? This work cannot be done alone. So this is get out of the silo of your own department, get out of the silo of your own institution. Like, we have partners in our name because none of our work we're not just coming up with this, right? We're trying to fill gaps and provide resources and partner with Frankenthaler Foundation, partner with maybe Art Bridges, looking out there and seeing what can we do to move the field forward. And we know we're a smaller field, right? We're not manufacturing, we're not transport, but we do have this responsibility to be accountable in our own way of looking at our resources and what we're using, but also we're public facing. We need to be inspiring that change for the future, for future generations, whether that's, we have a climate action playbook coming out this summer as part of Association of Children's Museums and Madison Children's Museum project to talk about climate to children 0 to 8 in your institution. That doesn't exist, right? We need to be thinking about that future and engaging community as not just something to do, but we are part of the community, and we are the people living in our community with these institutions, and we really need to own that. We also have data. If you look at the AAM Museum Goers Survey in 2022, 92% of museum goers said that museums should be reducing their carbon footprint, and they should be talking to the public about it. Cultural heritage is recently mentioned in the National Climate Assessment. We are mentioned in FEMA's new emergency guide. So we all care about different things. It might be a building, it might be a tradition, and we really need to be doing that work. And so one thing I want to bring up here is we don't have enough funding opportunities. The Frankenthaler Foundation's Frankenthaler Climate Initiative and the Tiger Foundation are the only private foundations that are funding this work. And so something we've been trying to do is make sure that culture has a spot in funding for IRA. I can talk a little bit about, but I also have a webinar that'll go into it for you. But really making sure the biggest piece is that any eligible institutions, you're not just up for reimbursement, but we made sure that those electives are direct pay to you. So you're not waiting 2 years and having to front the money, which isn't real for anyone, right? If we had $1 million, we would just pay for it to do something. And so thinking about a new paradigm for funding for this work, and it's looking outside the sector, it's partnering with higher ed, it's partnering with your community. Talk to your mayor, make sure you're in your resilience strategy for your entire town. Make sure that you're talking to the business next to you. Friends from before is what's going to help us all get through climate and get through a disaster. Just because your institution might have a backup generator, no one's coming to your institution just to look at art on the next day, right? You might not even be able to get there because there's the tree in the road. So making sure that you think about maybe a different way your institution could help, because you probably have that backup generator and you could be a place of refuge. You could be giving out supplies. You could be a place where people just need a break, like in Puerto Rico, the Contemporary Art Museum did that after Hurricane Irma. A place to charge your phone, use the facilities and enjoy the art as just a break. So I think we really need to shift how we're thinking, and on the funding piece, trying to get more foundations, get more even outside of the cultural sector, but getting the environment and culture program managers to be talking to each other. I think that's right now, one of the biggest hurdles that we're facing. Trying to prioritize that work, make sure that cultural institutions are included in everything from that federal funding to any foundation funding, frankly. So we're trying our best to make sure culture is included. Again, on the funding front, there are lots of grant programs out of Department of Energy, Department of Education. A lot of them are focusing on environmental justice. We can't talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion without talking about environment and climate change. We cannot do that. They are related. They're cause and effect here. We need to talk about them together. And there's funding opportunities for that. I think probably the most productive thing is I can send an email after to everyone with a list of links for some resources as well as funding, the IRA webinar in particular. But I do think there are many I'm just gonna check my notes for the funding piece here. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is something that people should look into. A lot of your institutions, I think eligibility is gonna be a big piece here. But that's out of IRA, the tax credits and deductions, and there's a lot of clean energy credits. And so something that we talk about with the Frankenthaler Climate Initiative is how do you get X amount of funding and then catalyze that to get more funding, right? Is it the name of the foundation? Absolutely, if you get a Frankenthaler Climate Initiative. Maybe it's your higher education neighbor gets something and you can be a part of that. We have to think creatively. So I think making the shift, we've been talking about those old legacy systems that Steve was talking about. We need to rethink what we're doing. And some of that, most of this climate work we're already doing. If you're in facilities, you're already trying to think about a maintenance plan for your systems. So why not make sure you're getting the most efficient ones and not just waiting 4 years because that's coming up? Start planning for it now and thinking about how your own systems interact with each other. I think that's the biggest piece for all of us. And I'm not saying it's easy. On a regular day, I'm trying to make sure I'm having breakfast and doing my work, right? But we all have that responsibility to be doing this climate work. And I think it's the Frankenthaler Foundation's Frankenthaler Climate Initiative is just a fantastic model that we really hope to replicate in other foundations and really hoping that takes off. I will give a little bit of detail. Unfortunately, the 4th round just closed for applications, but if you check the Frankenthaler Climate Initiative website in the fall, we'll have more probably information about the next round. But it is only about that energy efficiency and clean energy generation. So looking at everything from technical assistance, getting that energy audit, to implementation, solar panels, exploring geothermal, building envelope sealing, insulation, whatever it might be. And the newest one that we added this year was a Catalyst grant, which is $15,000, a quick hit. Just go buy the insulation and put it in, right? We don't need an assessment. Just go caulk, get the sealant, whatever you might need. So really trying to get that quick hit, high impact for your institution, and also trying to be more inclusive of not just large institutions but smaller ones, and trying to right size and scale that work. So we're excited. This summer we'll be sharing all of the recipients this year, and I think in the meantime really trying to push funders and more foundations, public, private, and nonprofit, collaborations, I think, to be doing this work together and hopefully be able to replicate this funding model.
I'll just put a plug in too and say that, well, it's really fun for the 3 of us work together on so many things, so it's just a treat to actually get to do it, to talk with each other in front of other people.
It is.
But what I did want to say to reiterate something that Stephanie said, and really this sets you up, is that the Frankenthaler Foundation really likes being a catalyst for these things, but we're really not. Unlike some other funders with some of their prize initiatives or projects, we don't really feel proprietary about it. And in fact, some of the most rewarding and meaningful partnerships and collaborations have been gleaned whenever organizations are stepping in and saying, yes, we have a green team or we have some kind of nascent thing going on. We're fine-tuning something we're doing already. And we feel very fortunate to step in and actually learn from them. And I think that it couldn't be a better moment to set you up in thinking about the very exciting work that's happening across not just MoCA, but the broader LA community with the Environmental Council.
Oh.
Hi, I'm Kelsey, and thank you, Kristi. And just excited to be here. Thank you, Art Bridges. Happy to be in conversation with friends. My role is very new. Like Whitney said, we're really like the two people that I'm aware of who have this job, and we're really kind of co-designing it, and we talk every 2 weeks on a regular schedule to learn from each other. And my role at MoCA is really, it's kind of in 3 buckets. There's staff culture, kind of direct impact in decarbonization, and then kind of storytelling. And so I think direct impact, is a lot of what we'll talk about today. It's kind of the unsexy stuff of infrastructure, retrofitting your buildings, reducing dependence on fossil fuel. And then storytelling is really doing what museums do best and using our artists to foreground stories and foreground climate stories. So I work with the curatorial staff, but also exhibition design and production staff to have, create shows that tell climate stories and also walk the walk. So it's, like we heard about, in terms of, reduce wall reduction and all of those things. And then staff culture is huge. And that's the biggest part of my work, which I was really surprised by. I thought it was going to be all kind of like finding funding for HVAC systems. And it was like, oh, no, I need to bring everyone along in this journey. And I like to say that if I do my job successfully, I won't have this job in 5 years. I think my role is to kind of embolden everyone else to think of their job as a climate job and to kind of integrate these questions into their workflow. I've been in therapy my whole life, so I think it's like I'm coming at it from the perspective of your therapist is asking you questions that then eventually you just naturally ask yourself. So I feel like I'm kind of like a climate therapist in the workplace. So it's a really broad job. I really work with every single department in the museum, which feels like such a gift. And I do that through a green team that we're working with that has 16 team members that have divided into working groups and basically are kicking ass working on projects. And that's been really gratifying. And then MoCA also has this amazing structure, the Environmental Council, which is an affinity support group, essentially like a board council. And their dues, annual dues, go into a kitty that basically funds all of this. So they fund my position and a lot of infrastructure upgrades. Which takes me to like how does my role exist and how are we paying for this, which I think is really what we're here to talk about. And what's kind of amazing is that virtually none of the funds come from our general budget. It's really all grants and partnerships, and then the support of the Environmental Council. So FCI has been huge for us. We're really lucky to have received 3 grants 3 years in a row. One in 2021 for scoping for our solar project at the Geffen Contemporary. And then in 2022, an implementation grant for solar at the Geffen Contemporary. And then in 2023, basically an HVAC upgrade through a digital energy management system for that building. Because we have 16 HVAC units that someone had to go up on the roof to change every time we needed to adjust the temperature, which stopped us from being able to sign on to the BSO Green Protocol because we couldn't actually fluctuate in a responsible way. So I'm really happy to say that because of the FCI grant from 2023, we are signing on to the BSO Green Protocol as of this week. And we'll have a wider, it's like, that's just like, that's a happy story. Good. Yeah, so.
Lemon lime success.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's a Sprite moment. But so I think there's ways in which both of you touched on communities and partnerships, and I think that we do this work in community, we do this work together, and it's not just your it's not just your department, it's not just your museum, it's not just the art world, it's like, it's all of us doing it. So anyway, that's what I got.
I love that, and I want to follow up on one point, and then I also want to make sure that you get to moderate, because we're just like left right in. An anecdote that I'm very fond of sharing. So the foundation has these different philanthropic initiatives, and a very well-regarded and at this moment unnamed university art museum, the chief curator came to us and they said, we have several amazing Frankenthalers. I was about to reach out to you for an unrelated, request for a loan. We have this, mid-century modernism show coming up. I'm really excited about it. I was astounded to learn that we just received this climate grant. What is this thing? They're in curatorial. They had no idea. 4 offices over, the director of facilities at the University Art Museum has pulled down an implementation grant. And I think that the point is that it was a learning moment for us. It was very humbling to recognize that, these 2 very different kind of philanthropic activities coming from us can then so quickly be siloed into 2 very different departments. And I think this gets so much to this idea of kind of technical plus. Like, will a robust implementation grant, like at the highest level of complexity, involve buy-in from many, many, technical facilities management kind of people and consultants? Yes. Should conservators be at the table having that conversation? Yes. Should leadership, should curatorial, should guest services be? I think it's immediately you see how this becomes a fundamentally intersectional issue that can not only, figure into conversations around green team, and I thoughts about the way that labor is structured and how it can be incentivized, but it's something that creates actually institutional buy-in. If you're communicating this up and down an org chart and to your communities, people start to understand how something as or funders, board members who may regard like HVAC as not the thing, suddenly it becomes the thing to be talking about.
And I think just to add on that there's, no one wants their name on an HVAC, though. I feel like there's going to be a great way to do that at some point. Like, if someone figures that out, like, let me know. But I think that collaboration piece and, like, that change arc, we know it's not easy, right? And so also you'll have a ton of naysayers who are like, I don't care. I'm here to do my job. I'm going to throw this wherever I want, whichever bin. I don't care how much you tell me, right? And it's fine. If you can get everyone else on board, it's hard, but it means that you're invested in culture and your institution and the art. We were talking about public art. It's ours. We are the people. We are not separate. Our institutions are not separate from that. So I think figuring out that making sure you have good inclusive language that isn't, well, we are the green team and we are telling you to do this, or this is the new process, but it will take time, any process. We all don't like change. And I think we just need to embrace that, a little bit of that chaos, which is very hard for me to say. And just be agile. All of this is agile, right? Try one thing, see if it doesn't work, see if it works, and keep on trying that. I mean, just in the field, right, with climate right now, the technology is changing so quickly. We almost have to be agile in this. And I think it's important that we embrace that and make sure that we're including everyone in the institution. One other point I want to make is I've had a few people be like, my board doesn't care. How do I make them care? What do they care about? Right? Like, do they care about the bottom line? Or do they care about like one piece in one of the galleries that maybe has their name on it? We'll show them a climate map where it's flooded, or show them what's going to happen in X amount of years, or meet them where they are with X amount of information and data. There's an institution who I was speaking with, and their board did not realize, quote unquote, how bad it flooded every time that it rained, and they are on a seafront. And they took a drone video and they showed it to the board, and the board realized, oh, everything is flooded here. I mean, and no wonder we're paying extra for, cleaning it up, et cetera. And so sometimes it's really about showing them or meeting them where they are and what makes them tick that is going to make them care. And trying to think about do we have a new budget line or implementing it into existing work?
I want to jump in too.
I would just wanted to ask one question, and then we can open it up for questions from everybody else. But if an institution is just starting out, what should they do? What should they look at? What are some low-hanging fruit that's easily achievable with high impact?
Energy. Find your energy bills. Yeah. Like, figure it out for your house, figure it out for your building, find your energy bills. Make a free account in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, type them in, and then every month, keep on doing that. And look, just look at the trend and think about, oh wow, our entire, one floor of our exhibits is all incandescents, and we are having a hard time managing the temperature. LEDs, put it on the board for next time they're due up. Anything else?
Energy.
Yeah, energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's.
Yeah.
Hello. Okay. I think, an institutional carbon calculation can be a lot, particularly if you're a small, nimble team. But I think in energy, just paying attention to energy is going to basically get you the same thing as a carbon calculation. I painstakingly did talking with every department, gathering the information, and energy was 70% of our footprint. So why was I looking at the other 30%? I need to be looking at just energy. So.
And if you realize do a waste audit. I can include that in the links too. But energy is your number one, and I think that's where most of the funding is existing right now in the environment world. And so that's going to be your biggest bang for your buck.
Thank you all. I'd like to open it up now for questions from everyone.
Hi, this has been really exciting. I have a question for James. I'm just curious. You are one of the first private foundations that is doing this work. How has the response been with other foundations? Are they interested in joining, or are they asking you why you're doing this, or?
It's been great. The short answer is stay tuned. I will say one thing that's been very gratifying about the evolution of the program is, and I think Stephanie can attest to this, that it's evolved, like the field and the fluency in the conversation has evolved radically in just a few short years. That also means there are other, orgs and NGOs out there, not necessarily funders, but coalitions and entities that are aggregating knowledge, right? And so one of the things that's been very useful for us, 2 years ago, it was sort of coming out of the depths of the pandemic. We actually had sort of an awards ceremony. We pegged it to Climate Week, which has a certain visibility in New York. It's also, like, for those of you who know Manhattan at that time, it's the worst. It's when the UN General Assembly meets, and it's just like everything is clogged in New York. But we had an event at the Morgan Library, and we had several of the grantees speak on a panel format. Last year, we actually evolved that and had an event at the New Museum, audience maybe 200, 250. And we explicitly made it less of a, like, aren't we great for funding, and made it much more of a kind of dialogue between and among grantees, while opening that conversation up, not just on the stage, but throughout those days. Victoria Siddall from Gallery Climate Coalition was one of the speakers at that event. We were liaising with people like Larissa Harris at Teager, adjacent to that event. And I think that points enough to the fact that we're increasingly understanding the way that FCI fits into a broader philanthropic landscape, a broader, dare I say, activist landscape, right? Really directly acknowledging the ways that this is intersectional with climate justice, with community engagement, with imagined or actual audiences at different arts institutions.
Just want to add on that. We've definitely spoken to other foundations who are interested, right? It's the same thing you're facing, like getting their board on board and making sure that it aligns with their values, pillars, et cetera. We've had some success in the federal government with the National Endowment for the Humanities. Their climate smart grants they fund sustainability plans, do it in a cohort. I'll include that in the email, but making sure that agencies in the federal government know what work we're doing, how we're a mouthpiece and storytelling for the public as well. So I think it's coming. I think we have this great model, and we have this so many great stories that it feels like we're a little bit on that crest of making sure or seeing that implement in other foundations and places.
I want to make sure that Kristi gets to actually speak.
Oh, thank you, everybody. This was absolutely wonderful. Congratulations on the work that you're doing. And Kelsey, congratulations on being such a trailblazer, truly. 2 questions. One is more abstract and geopolitical and may not have an answer. And the second is based on municipality and regional politics. So the first question is, when I was discussing our year of the environment with a funder of one of my exhibitions who's based in Boston, she said to me, Asma, you have to be very careful here. You're talking about climate justice, you're talking about climate change, but in fact there's many populations all over the world, even in the global south, particularly in the global south, who actually don't want to rebuff efforts to maintain a dependency on oil, like Guyana, for example. And I'm wondering whether you have wandered into these kinds of ethical quandaries when having these kinds of conversations. I found it very interesting. I'm just wondering whether, since this is your discourse, you've encountered that. That's one.
I think, yes. I mean, there's museums who we've worked with where they can't use the word climate, so they use the word environment or health or whatever you can say. You know, you don't want to jeopardize, you know, if you're getting grant funding from the state or wherever it might be. But there's also the other part where, well, maybe you just do it. Maybe you are that trailblazer and you take that risk because you know it's the right thing. I know some organizations don't like to call it climate action, and they're just, you know, they say sustainability or climate smart work or whatever it might be, and that's fine, but I think you want to make sure you're being true to your organization and your values are aligned, and that if you think that that's going to really affect, you know, how another country or another place is going to perceive it, then you need to weigh that and make that decision for yourself.
I could take that question in so many different ways, and I'll also just note, you know, my own training. Like, I used to be a professor at private and public universities, in art history departments. Used to be a curator, so it's rewarding to be in a position where I understand what it means to be thinking about the discourse as well as the raw logistical, like, funding realities of these scenarios. I think building on what Stephanie said. Excuse me. There's a converse model where, you know, some players in some states, they're really, you know, institutions that are comfortable with their cultural profile. You know, they'll say, "Put it on me." Like, we'll take the heat, and we will actually be the model that our neighbors in other sectors can then look at and say, "Well, if they're doing it, and they're simply lowering their costs, and, you know, they're putting a solar array up, why can't we?" You know, there are ways to address that. There's another thread that was, I think, weaving through some of the conversations yesterday, and certainly around, like, an hourglass conversation. And it's that funny word around growth. Excuse me. So I think one of the really short distances traveled often when we're talking to potential partners is, you know, people immediately saying, "Oh, well, you know, we're going for LEED standards," and there's this immediate leap into conversations around highly technological systems, right? But many of the best solutions are not, like, highly technological advanced systems. And I think, you know, I think it raises a bigger question, and certainly one that we are actively thinking about, which is to say, like, is the answer actually to go to funders and say, we need to build a new wing? Like, is that the most environmentally sound practice, right? Maybe it's not. Like, you know, retrofitting is very interesting to think about in that way. So I'm very interested in exploring how philanthropy can like this can incentivize models that don't immediately assume that the best move is aggressive growth, right? And that the conversation doesn't always need to be like, let's build an amazing HVAC system.
Thank you. The second question, if I can do a twofer here, is I was telling Stephanie this because Stephanie's from Baltimore, but when I've created this citywide eco challenge, and I've been talking to the aquarium, the zoo, you know, the Chesapeake Shakespeare Company, what I've heard is that the city doesn't even have recycling, and that many of these directors take their recycling home and recycle it that way. So what funding opportunities or what strategies would you suggest to encourage, galvanize, put the onus on municipalities in which our civic institutions are embedded to be a better partner?
Well, first, you're not alone. That's a huge problem across the U.S. I think it's also, I mean, it's influence, right? So getting the cultural institutions together and the libraries and businesses and, you know, everyone together, right? It's not just going to be all of the cultural institutions uprising to make that change, maybe. But I think it's it's the same thing, like what is making them tick? Is it money? I mean, it would be great visibility, right? It doesn't make any sense, frankly, in Baltimore, where like we've Chesapeake Bay. I mean, there's huge ecosystem restoration, but it's figuring that out, right? And making it relevant to the people and saying, well, here, these brownfields, or here's why we want to do this challenge. I want to think on it more and come back to you. But I think the biggest thing in success we've seen is talking to other people and you have power in numbers and that collective effort to go to the city and try to make that change.
This is fantastic. This is such a great session because I keep going through my mind with what Stephen was talking about at the lunch break. And my colleague Bess is here, and we had a facilities manager who really tried to get a kind of green team going, and he did a waste assessment, he cut energy way down, and then the question became, how can we be better community members? One of our performance pillars was, how do you become a better community member in our daily activities in terms of waste and energy usage and so on. And the initiative absolutely died. It completely died. And it wasn't that anybody was against it. It was that as an organization, we are so wrapped up in these legacy activities that are revenue generators and trying to balance the budget that I think everybody just did not have time to become responsible again for something that is so important, because we would have to stop doing something in order to start doing that. And of course we should, right? But the way the museum is defined, the way what we do is defined, are these legacy values that we just aren't taking the time to look at and regroup. And I think that, I don't know, but I think that it held us back. The initiative completely died. There are many of us that want to do it, that are taking the material home to recycle. But to understand that we are a community and we are a system, I mean, I think that's the big thing, is that we are all components of a system that has feedback loops built into it that we're not even aware of. So we have no idea what the steps are we can take. And I guess, how do we do this? How do we shift the idea of what a museum does so that climate responsibility, energy responsibility, carbon responsibility becomes, our community obligation? I'm having a hard time.
I wanted to say one very parenthetical note to that, and I also want to acknowledge Kristi's role as someone who is directing cohorts. Like, something that we've talked a lot about, and I think you're really practicing, is this idea of this is exhausting work, right? And it's, it's a slog. And I think, one of the things we're very interested in is how could evolving some kind of a cohort style model with the climate initiative decentralize that so that it's actually more peer-to-peer, whether it's regional or it's by institution type, because that's one of the ways that I would believe the work can be really sustaining. And I'll just note that we are very interested in that. That's one of the things I'm very excited about this week and I would love to hear more, it can be after this panel and on, about the most effective ways that those cohort models can be deployed.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're touching on many important things, but I think capacity is like the biggest killer in this work. And I think why I feel so lucky at MoCA is that my position is funded outside of the budget. So when it's a lean time, I still have my job. And I'm still there as a full-time staffer driving this. And I think that when you don't have that, like I think everyone in this room doesn't have a full-time person, everyone gets pulled in a different direction, and then things are dead in the water. And it's not from lack of interest and desire. And so I think that that's really challenging. I think having leadership really prioritize it and say, this isn't additional, this is a part of your workday, and we're going to make compensation in other ways so that you can do this work, I think is really effective. And I feel very lucky that Johanna Burton, our director, is incredibly supportive. And our board is incredibly supportive. I mean, I think touching on the PR, I have to say, 2 motivators. Finding someone's button, and people's button are usually good optics and money. And so, you know, who cares about waste? Who cares about energy? If they care about their bottom line or they care about how the institution looks, that can then help them prioritize that. And then that trickles down into having capacity and ability to do the work.
I just want to add on to the cohort model that it works. For the climate resilience resources project I talked about, we had 2 cohorts, one in New Mexico and one in Puerto Rico, who worked together to develop their climate resilience strategies. So it wasn't just like, oh, we have to go through this module and figure this out alone. But the biggest outcome from that is they said they felt validated, just like all of us in this room are like, oh, what is the foam I'm using? I don't know either. No one's using foam. Where is the foam? You know, I know so much about foam right now. And what that validation that we're also all tired and we don't really want it to be extra work, but then the inspiration, like one said, oh, well, I explored solar and for this and this backup battery, and they said, oh, I didn't realize you could do that. And that sharing of ideas, just like this cohort here, basically, is that success to make that plan, even just to start talking to do something. So talk to your neighbors, talk to your friends.
Very quickly, thank you again for this panel. It's just been so inspiring and engaging, and I just want to go run into the future. So thank you. A very practical question about green teams, because in Baltimore we're sort of going through and developing a green plan, and we have a green team, and I think just how do you, Kelsey, particularly to you, we're doing this work to try and embed these questions in all of our efforts, but you know, I think, what is some advice you would have for me, for everyone else who's thinking about and working through a green team?
Be persistent, be a cheerleader. I think that I spent about 6 months with our green team meetings embarrassing myself with icebreakers and get to know yous, and like really, it's like, not, you guys don't know me, but that's not me. And I was really trying, and I was like, oh, this thing's not gonna work. And then one day, like the surliest naysayer in the group, who had to be there by virtue of his job, of his type, you know, he was in operations and he just had to be in the group, came in with an idea. You know, and he was like, well, how about this? And I was like, and it was about, you know, one of our kitchenettes was using plastic forks, and he was like, well, I have a little room in my budget to get metal forks. And I was like, okay, cool. It's like, this is working. So I think just like, it kind of community building and coalition building, it's not like kumbaya and everyone's on board immediately. You have to kind of go through it. And I think if you really just, also, the other thing is I think you need to listen. Listening is so important, as opposed to coming in and being like, this is my plan, be a part of my plan, the end. Saying, what do you think? What do you think of what we're doing? Like, connect to their why, and I think that gets you to the how of like how you're gonna do it all together if you understand what's motivating them and what they care about.
Well, thank you all so much for your time, your expertise. This has been really great. Oh, do we have another question? Oh, Sasha? No, that's fine.
I was going to share. Is this on? Yeah. I wanted to share one very brief example of working with artists directly to make an incredible impact. And I will use the example of the artist Maya Lin, who we organized an exhibition at the museum, and at the World Health Organization had just come out with a climate change paper. And she was talking a lot about how, you know, no one's reading this paper. It's, you know, it's 200 pages long, and just the power of that she had within her to create an object that would make people, that could distill the work and make people pay attention. And so she created a diptych called 2 degree, 4 degree, and it was about the water rising. And she focused specifically on Manhattan. And put it up on this is the water line if the global temperature rises by 2 degrees versus 4 degrees. Well, you have never seen so many New Yorkers looking at a work of art and saying, wait a minute, my apartment is going to be underwater and everything else. And underneath it said, basically, interested, here's the paper, here's the QR code, read the paper because your house is going to be flooded. So I think that partnering with artists is so powerful to break through the message to your city's mayor, to the bureaucracy that's holding it back, that we do have this amazing access to artists who are going to help us cut through. They say that picture's worth 1,000 words, and in this case, it was like a climate change white paper. Anyway, she really nailed it, and I've never seen so many people quickly grasp a global warming issue because it for their selfish real estate interests. I mean, if you want to get, New Yorkers love real estate, so that was the perfect way to do it. So anyway, artists, thinking about how we leverage artists in championing this work.
I just want to add something that you just touched on, and a little bit of a response also to what you were saying, Asma. As far as how institutionally we can leverage and get our municipalities to take action. So I'm at the Buffalo AKG, and we've just gone through this massive campus expansion and renovation, and that also involved asking all of our sort of city, county, state entities for funding. And in order to do that, what we did was we commissioned the University at Buffalo to do an economic impact study to determine what our economic impact is. And that has offered us so much leverage with the government. And, if you get together if it's not just your institution, if you get together with all of the culturals in Baltimore or all of your culturals in whatever city you are in, and you do an economic impact study and you take that to your municipalities and say, this is the impact that we're bringing, this is the tourism that we're bringing, the benefit that we're bringing to the public, but we need you to do this to get on our level, to participate in this action, in this culture that we're building. It's incredible the leverage that just that one study has given us. So I just wanted to plant that little seed because it was really, really impactful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, again, thank you all for being here on this panel. We will share the resources and compile all that and make sure everyone gets it. And, eager to continue on these conversations, either mobbing them at lunch or, through email and other digital ways, because we definitely want this conversation to keep continuing and inspire each other and commiserate, Thank you. And believe. Sorry, I keep spinning. Is lunch ready? Yeah. Okay. Great. And lunch is ready. Thank you.
I know. Oh my God. I was like, if I spin around one more time. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Kristi.